and a lady blonde on the show. Before each show, I did my best to compile a list of questions to ask them, and I sent out requests on Facebook asking people to write me private messages and give their insight into the opinions on each gender. Some of the responses were quite fascinating. I really had no idea, none at all, when I first made the request of the types of responses I would get. Some were right on and some were just downright scary. One thing's for sure, people really, and I mean really, go through some stuff when it comes to dealing with the opposite sex. So for this show, we're going to attempt to dissect these two shows and do our best to make some sense, dare I say common sense, out of them. So today it'll just be Theron and I, and if you have any questions for Theron or myself, please feel free to call in. The number here is 541-284-7953. Once again, that number is 541-284-7953. Give us a call. Let us know what you think. Man, bro, I mean, you were here.
I was here.
And
I am kind of just taking it all in.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I mean, by far, out of all the shows I've done so far, which is, total of like a handful, these two shows are by far the hardest. I mean, the men were definitely harder to control.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the studio, I mean, they just kind of, were throwing stuff out there left and right. And,
Bomb throwing, really.
Throwing out cuss words and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that made it really hard. The women were more reserved. And,
I thought the women that came on were fantastic. I mean, and I thought it was pretty clever the way that you had it all lined up that they were about 20 years apart.
Yeah.
And their answers to a lot of your questions varied
It did.
significantly because of that.
They really
So
did.
that was very interesting.
Yeah, the guys I think were closer in ages together. And one of the feedback I got from the guys show was that that they seemed young. And that,
The guys?
Yeah. So they got a
Look,
level of immaturity there. I mean, somebody said that was
exactly.
out there.
Exactly.
And I think that the guys, for the most part, I mean, there was a ton of ego.
Sure there was. Yeah.
I mean, just a ton of ego.
Yeah.
I mean, none of them really wanted to admit or say, exactly what, they felt. In
Well,
relationships
the thing,
or things
and
like
I don't
that.
know how old these guys were, but they're around 40.
They're our age. Yeah.
Okay,
They're
around 40.
mid to late 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're talking like they're 14 years old.
Well, I was going to say
I mean,
26,
the one guy,
27.
one guy for sure. I mean, all he wanted to do was talk about his sexual prowess.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown.
Yeah.
No one liked Mr. Brown.
I mean, really.
No one did. I mean,
At some point, you got to have a little bit of maturity sleeping in there. But
and I think that, like I said, I think it's all hype for the most part. I mean,
Maybe.
I think he was kind of talking out of his backside. I mean, he kind of, really nice guy. I mean, I like the guy. We've talked for, quite a bit in the past. But, I mean, in terms of how he was presenting himself, how he was, talking about women type of deal. I mean, it was kind of it was an ego stroke the entire time.
right.
And, you bring up problems in the bedrooms like, well, I don't have that problem. I mean, it's just an automatic response. It's like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Yeah, total Cro-Mag.
Yeah. So, I thought that was interesting. And I thought that, like I said, for the women, a little bit quieter. They were quieter, a little bit harder to get engaged. It felt more of, with the men, it felt like the Wild West. I mean, they were just kind of we'd get stuck on something, and then it would be hard to get them off it type of deal.
Right.
With the women, it felt more like a question and answer type of deal, and then some of the answers would give me scoobies, and I'd just kind of sit there and, scratch my head and go, what just happened?
Yeah, I think, what was, for me, the most compelling part about having the three women on there was that one question you asked, do nice guys finish last?
Yeah.
Now, the youngest one said, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Right.
And the oldest one's like,
They're like, oh, no.
She's vehemently, no, they don't.
Oh,
No, they
like,
don't.
no, yeah.
And the one in the middle, the one around 40, she's like, they don't, but I get it. And yeah, they might. She was a little more on the fence in the middle.
Some of the, I was going to say, some of the cliches that you hear, I mean, I brought him up on the show.
Which, by the way, is absolutely true. Nice guys do finish last, always have, always will.
I was going to say, I mean, the women basically admitted that. I mean, first and foremost, they're talking about, listen, we want men that have confidence. You got to be a confident guy.
Yeah.
And then when it came up to that, it's like, yeah, you know what? If you're constantly doing too much for them, they lose respect, and that is exactly what the guys were saying. I mean, the guys were saying the same type of thing. They were saying, once you lose a woman's respect, I mean, you're kind of done.
Right.
So, I mean, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, people are different. Relationships are different. I mean, there's obviously between Mr. Pink and Lady Blue, they were definitely trying to take more of the middle road type of thing and say, well, it kind of applies to both genders. And for the most part, they're correct. I mean, people make mistakes. They screw up on both sides. I mean, it's kind of how it works. But when you're trying to draw a distinction, and isolate, specifically, this is what women do, this is what men do, it's really difficult when somebody pops off with, yeah, everybody does that, because that's not always true. I mean, there are some things that are fairly consistent with men that go on, and there's some things that's fairly consistent with women. And frankly, even though we covered a lot, some of the stuff that we covered seemed very, very brief, and it didn't always feel like we really got into the meat of things. I mean, it's only an hour, but even so, I mean, when you've got 3 people here,
right? Well, it was a kind of show that you need at least 3 episodes, 3 to 4 hours for each.
Yeah,
each
because
group there.
Yeah, you could break it down and talk just about. I mean, for the guys, it seemed like they were just. I don't even know how to describe it, but just like totally stuck on the sex issue.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that was just. I mean, the moment you brought it up, I mean, it was done deal. Mm-hmm. But what I found fascinating is men tend to equate women to sex. I mean, that's what I got. I mean, it's just kind of like they.
Well, I think that's true. I think that's true up to a certain age. A guy gets to a certain age, and he starts to experience a change where sex isn't his prime motivating force. There's a little more spirituality that becomes involved with it. But definitely, I mean, I think for a lot of guys, it's up until they're in their mid-30s. Some guys it's younger, some guys it's a little older, but for the most part,
I would agree. I mean, seriously. I mean, I think that. I mean, obviously, when you're young, I mean, you're chasing trim big time when you're young. But as you get older,
yeah.
I mean, you just start to want more out of a relationship.
I mean, definitely. By the time you're 45, you should have been making that transition where you're not just looking at women as a sex object.
Yeah, and I think so too. And
if you are still after 45, then there's something wrong with you.
But prior to that, based on these guys, I mean, the sex drive basically drove the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, that's what I was getting from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, they want to know whether or not she's going to put out, how good she's going to be in bed. Obviously, because their egos are going on about how great they are in bed. And the thing that I find fascinating about that, okay, is if you ask these guys any clinical questions in terms of the biology of a woman and the biology of a man and how things work and things like that. I mean, something as simple as, we had brought up penis size on the girls' show, but not necessarily with the guys, because the guys were just bragging about how big they were anyway. But I mean, you bring up a question like that, most of those guys, I would say probably 1 out of 3, assuming that Mr. Pink would actually give a logical answer. But my guess is the other 2 would pop off with, oh yeah, I'm X amount of inches, I'm 6 inches, I'm 7 inches, I'm 8 inches, or in case of Mr. Brown, he'd be 14 inches because he's cool. But
right.
But I mean, you can't. I mean, even from that standpoint, there really is no accurate measurement of a guy's penis. There's just not. I mean,
and according to the women, that it wasn't very relevant.
Yeah, and according to the women, they're like, it's not a big deal anyway, and that type of thing. But and I think for, like you said, I mean, the same type of situation happens with women as it does with men. I mean, as they get older, they get a little bit more mature, and questions of penis size and stuff like that kind of go out the window. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a young girl's thing, where they're talking about that.
Right.
But my point is, I mean, in terms of anatomy, the male anatomy, okay, just clarify things for the listeners, the whole 3 people that are listening. okay, in terms of penis size, the reason why it's a big deal to guys is primarily out of ego, but it's kind of a false ego thing, because even if a guy says he knows what his measurement is, unless he's measured religiously at the same time every single day and eaten the same foods the night prior, and the room temperature is similar to what it was. In other words, if there's a controlled environment and he takes that measurement over a period of a week, and then he divides that measurement that he got on a day-to-day basis by those 7 days, that is the only way he's going to get an accurate measurement of the size of how large he is. Because temperature, body weight, what you eat, stress levels, anxiety, all those things, blood flow, it all contributes to how large or how small you are at any given time. And so that's a lot. I mean, that's just basic common medical knowledge. Okay?
Oh, guys don't want to hear that.
But guys don't want to hear that,
Yeah.
and they don't do that. So they walk around saying, well, I'm X amount of inches. It's total BS. It's not true. Not to mention the fact that you have women out there that, I'm sorry, the female anatomy, the cervix is located, 2 to 4 inches inside the vagina. So, and that expands and contracts.
Right.
Based on, temperature, their moods, things along those lines. So to sit there and say, well, I want a guy who's that amount of size. I kid you not, I'll tell you a story. I'm at a bar with a friend of mine, and this is comedy. And of course, penis size gets brought up. And this lady's sitting on this chair, and she pops off with, I don't date any guy that's anything less than 12 inches. And me and my buddy look at each other, and we're like, well, we suddenly feel inadequate here. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah, all right.
This kind of comedy thing. And I asked her, I said, do you know what 12 inches is? And she's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, anybody got a phone book? And the bartender, I went up to the bar and I said, hey, you got a phone book? I just want to look something up. He says, sure. Takes his phone book, hands it to me. And she's sitting on this chair, and I put this phone book down, straight up and down. I said, this phone book is 12 inches from top to bottom. And I said, you sit on that chair, and I put it between her legs. And I said, you see where the top of this phone book is? I mean, literally, it was up right
to the
in the
base
middle
of
her
her breast.
chest.
Yeah, right.
It's like, you couldn't handle 12 inches if you tried.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible. It's not physically, humanly possible. You can't do it. So you're spreading BS. So what you have is young women that are spreading lies about this stuff out of ignorance. They don't know enough about their own bodies or the guys that they're with. And you have young guys that buy into it out of ego, because guys, like we discussed, it's primarily out of performance. And I'm sorry, I mean, as a guy,
It's a culture thing too.
Guys growing up, me as a guy growing up, I had the same questions too. I delved into it, read a bunch of stuff. I realized I couldn't figure out why I kept having to tie knots at the end of my condoms.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And then I figured out, I trust in the capitalist society. I trust in capitalism. I trust that Trojan, if there was such a broad range of size of penis, they would come out with multiple size condoms. Okay.
Well, they do have the Magnum, don't they?
They do have the Magnum. Have you ever laid a Magnum and a standard condom side by side?
I have not.
I have.
Is there a big difference?
No, there's an 1/8 of an inch difference.
Seriously?
Serious. There's less than a 1/2 of an inch difference in length and an 1/8 of an inch difference in width. I mean, that's how pathetic. There is no such thing as racial designated condoms, folks. They're not out there. So it's not out there. It's not if you're Muslim, you don't wear a certain size. If you're white, you don't wear a certain size. If you're black, you don't wear a certain size. They're standardized size because there's pretty much average sizes out there. There's less than 4% of the population that has a penis over the size of 9 inches. Okay, so you do the math. 99.9% of the guys that you're dating, they have an average size junk. So that's all we're going to spend on that. And that's a little common sense for you, because that's just something that I know a lot of people struggle with. Cleanliness was a big deal to men. They wanted women who were clean, not just clean in how they took care of themselves, but how they lived was a big deal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I was going to say I kind of agree with that too.
Yep.
I mean, I didn't think that was too far off.
Did you ask that of the women? I can't remember.
You know what? I didn't ask. Some questions I asked that were similar. I asked what women found. See, the question I asked men was, you know, what they found attractive in in women, and what would cause them to want to date them. And so cleanliness was the thing that brought up. When it came to women, I mean, I asked the same question, but for women, it was confidence. They really wanted. So once again, I mean, you had men that were looking at kind of an outward aesthetic type of thing, and women were kind of looking at, you know, how the person carried himself.
And that totally makes sense too. You know, as far as the stereotype between men and women, men are, in general, visual creatures. So it's about what they see and what they, you know, can touch and smell, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, and that stereotype is somewhat true.
Where the women, it's more about character,
how they carry themselves and stuff like that, which is why I brought up, and it was farther down in the segment. I mean, in regards to how, you know, women or guys seem to be a little bit more vain than women.
I think that happens quite often.
Okay, but they argued with me and they said, "Oh no, guys are more vain." But it's like, to be totally honest, okay, and I know that this is, I mean, obviously because I'm a guy, so I mean, there was probably quite a bit lost. But the women, I mean, it was kind of confusing in some parts, because you had one or two of them, you know, saying yes and one saying no, and then they would talk about it, and then they would kind of agree. I mean, it's like, what the heck? What just happened there?
Yeah.
You know, so.
Also, something else that the women said that I totally agree with is women are far more graphic than men are. I mean, that wasn't so much the case as far as on the radio, but when you get a group of women together, they're going to be far more detail-oriented than men. Men will be more crude and...
See, I struggled with that because...
Not so deep. But women will be a little more analytical, but they will share every tiny little detail. And that's what's tough about being in certain relationships, is because there will be absolutely nothing sacred in your relationship.
Nothing private amongst their girlfriends.
Right. Yeah. And they will share every tiny little detail to your embarrassment if you ever knew.
Okay, but, well, that brings up a couple questions. Okay, first and foremost, does that make sense to you? I mean, do you understand it? Because for me, I hear that. And they said that. They said, you know, we go into more detail, that type of thing. I don't understand what that means. I mean, primarily because, I mean, I'm a guy, and I mean, I've had conversations with guys, and it's like, okay, well, I think I'm going into detail, but I guess in a way, maybe we don't. I mean, obviously, we're crude.
Yeah, guys are more surface level. I used to have a job where...
How do you know this, though? You're a guy.
Well, I used to work in an establishment that was about 99% women.
So you just overheard conversations
all the time, and it was the kind of stuff that would just blow your mind, because, you know, if there's men around, they won't go there, but if there's no men around, you know, nothing's off the table.
See, and this is the thing for me. I mean, for me personally, okay, I understand women talk, so that's never a surprise or shock to me. And if I find out that, you know, the woman I'm with or something is talking, okay. But in my mind, if my woman's talking to one of her girlfriends about me or us or the situation or whatever, and she's saying things to her girlfriends that she would not say to me, or she has to keep secret from me, I'm sorry, I think in my mind that's cheating.
You've been cheated on a lot, probably. In your life.
I'm
sorry to say, but that's so true.
I think that's dishonesty. I think you're not being honest with that person, because I think the person that really needs to know or hear that stuff, especially if there's a problem, is the person you're with. And why you would confide in a friend outside of the person you're with, I don't know.
That was a huge complaint for me. Is in a previous relationship was, you know, having to be very, very careful, like I'm walking on eggshells, you know, about every subject, and having to say, "Can this be sacred between us?" Instead of,
does it have to reach
right?
everybody?
And if I didn't that, then it was all fair game.
Yeah, that's not cool, man.
Not cool at all, because, you know, you can't
You can't trust what's being said about you.
Exactly. You can't just let it flow.
Because, God knows what's being said. And then, especially if it's somebody that you're with and you rub elbows with, mutual friends that are same type of friends, it's like, if you got your girl out there saying stuff, and see, that's the thing, I think Mr. Brown had popped off with, what if because I had asked the question, what if your lady talks about you to her friends and he's, oh, I love it. Talks negative. He's like, oh, I love it because then I'll get with her. It's like total BS. I mean, the guy's like smoking crack or something with that statement. I mean, it was a total ego statement. 9 times out of 10, the bottom line is, rule of thumb, folks. Okay, if you're with somebody, it's in poor taste. It's really bad. It's a bad idea to talk bad about them to other people. Now, I understand that, when you guys...
It really is a reflection on you.
It really is. I mean, if you're out there and you're talking trash about the guy you're with or the girl you're with to the friends... See, and I always find it fascinating because especially guys that do this, that guys will be around other guy friends and think they're really cool because they're stroking their ego again and they're talking trash about their lady in front of their guy friends. And I'm looking at them and obviously, like I said, a lot of guys do it. So apparently they think they look cool. But I mean, for me, I'm looking at it and I'm going... What a D-bag, dude. It's like, what's that say about you? I mean,
and I think a lot of people do that unconsciously.
You picked this girl.
Right.
What's that say about you? If she's so bad, you must be a complete and utter idiot.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, this is the one thing that, and that's a huge pet peeve for me is, I'm the type, I will just shut up. I won't say anything. I'll just observe. All right. And, if I'm dating somebody and she spends a lot of time, even unconscious speaking ill of her ex, that's coming at you. You know that's going to be you.
Exactly. Sooner or later, the first argument, she's going to be running off with her girlfriends, and she's going to be saying that stuff about you.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and to me, like I said, I think it's a fascinating thing because you've got, and it happens on both sides. It absolutely happens on both sides. I've seen guys do that to the women they're with. It's like, what? Me personally, I'm never going to refer to my lady as a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's lame, and I never refer to her as a ball and chain. I think that's stupid too. Guys,
or old lady.
Guys that do that, it's like, man, you're insulting yourself by doing that. You're making yourself look like a jackass.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
I agree.
I'm not a big fan of that.
I know people like that. In fact, I just heard a guy last night that I was having a conversation with refer to his girlfriend as his old lady.
Yeah, I don't get it.
And it's in poor taste.
I don't think it's in poor taste, and this is not a very smart, intelligent person. I mean, the people that you see doing that, it's like, man, they really don't realize how stupid they look or how stupid they sound.
Right.
I mean, it's just, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. I don't know. Total joke. Let's see.
Well, I think a lot of times people they say things and they don't realize they're completely not conscious of the implications that it's going to have, or how it reflects on them.
Well, okay, so check this out, though. I mean, situation where they tell their friend something that's private amongst you, but they know it's something that's going to upset you, so they tell their friend, please don't say anything to him.
Right.
I don't want him to know. It's dude, you're frickin'. I mean, that's...
you just compounded the problem.
Yeah, you just made it 10 times. I mean...
And that's where I found myself, where I was constantly feeling like I was walking on eggshells. I had to be very conscious of every little thing that I said, because knowing anything that came out of my mouth was going to be shared with at least 5 different
Yeah,
people.
You're going to be on the hook for it.
Right.
Yeah, basically, it's like being in a relationship where you can't trust the person you're with.
Mm. And you have a woman who does that, who tells at least 5 of her friends. She's not thinking for herself.
No.
She's taken those responses that she gets to those people that she shares it with, and that is her mind.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're dealing with a thought process, or attitude, a statement that you totally don't know how it was arrived at. I mean, because you're responding to something her friend said.
Right.
It's like, well,
exactly.
What was the premise of
and you
this
can't.
statement?
So if she's talking to you about something, you don't know how to respond. You don't know how to talk to her because she's not thinking with her own brain.
No.
She already went over this with a handful of other girlfriends, and it's the her girlfriends that's become her own brain.
Yeah, I think it's
And it's incredibly frustrating.
incredibly frustrating, incredibly bad, and I mean literally, I was in a meeting one time where this lady was sitting at a table, and it was actually I was the only guy there, and there was just a bunch of women, and basically I overheard this lady talking about her husband and about the fact that he doesn't help out with the housework and this and that, and she was just going on and on and on and just ripping this guy. And all these ladies were just kind of nodding along, and every once in a while you heard one say that, oh, well, my man ain't like that, But outside of that, none of them were looking at her going, what are you doing? What's the matter with you? Because you're kind of behaving like a jackass right now. I mean, not one of them said that. And frankly, I would have loved to have said that. But being the only guy, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to cause a rift. But I've seen guys do that to women. I've seen women do that to guys. And I'm telling you, folks, right now, common sense show, that's just stupid. That's like the dumbest thing you can possibly do in a relationship. You don't say things behind your mate's back. I don't care if they're the closest friend you got. If you can't say it to their face, you don't say it to them. Simple as that. Full disclosure.
Right.
That way, you guys can trust each other. You're solid in how each other, what that other person feels about you, what they're going to say. And, yeah. I mean, you got to be able to trust the other person that they're going to be saying good things about you, or things that, maybe some things that they say is true, Well, then I guess you'll have to deal with that,
Right.
But you're never going to deal with those things. You're never going to approach those things if you're not talking openly with each other. So that's a big deal. How did you like that? How did you like the comment from the men when we're talking about putting out on the first date, and some guy popped off with, actually, I think it was Mr. Blonde. He popped off with, women that put out on their first date are comfortable with their own body, and women who don't aren't.
Disagree.
I totally did too. I mean,
I don't think it has anything to
that.
do with body. It has everything to do with mind.
Yeah. I mean, come on. I thought that was a little bit of a joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the women who want something more don't want to be treated like sex objects.
In fact, I think the opposite could be true. That they're so insecure that they've got to prove themselves.
I agree. I mean, frankly, for me personally, a woman who puts out on the first date, somebody calls me, I don't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust them. I just don't. I mean, those type of women, it's like, you know what? The moment I'm gone, I can't so much as go to the restroom without worrying about who else she's hitting on.
Exactly.
Yeah. If it comes that easy, you know what? Then anybody can get it.
Yep.
And women are less vain than men. So, I mean, you don't have to be, you could be an 800-pound walrus. You could have your baseball cap turned sideways, have baggy pants, whatever, smell like crap, and they'll sleep with you.
Exactly.
There's somebody out there for you.
And I know people like that.
I do too, man. And I'm like, women are very forgiving when it comes to stuff like that. And I mean, the moment you see a woman do that stuff, it's like, you know what? You need to kick her to the curb. Let's see here. Chivalry's dead. I brought that up on both sides. Men said that women behaving in a manner to be afforded chivalry. A lot of women nowadays, they give an attitude if you try to open a door for them.
Yep.
And I think some truth to that. I think that there has been some societal changes in that regard. On one hand, you have women that say they want chivalry, and yet, let's see, Mr. Blonde brought up, due to hip hop, feminist movement, responsible for the reduction of men willing to be chivalrous. That's what he was saying. And like I said, I do think there's some truth to that. I think that guys naturally want to do and care for the woman they're with.
Naturally, that I'm not sure. I think upbringing has a lot to do with it.
Okay, yeah, upbringing, sure, but I think that if a guy is with a girl, they want to do things for him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's pretty standard. I mean, if they're with a girl that they like, they want to do things for them. They want to be regarded as that hero, somebody who takes care of business type of deal. But I think that the level in which and the means in which that takes place in a lot of ways is dependent on women and how they perceive it and how they react to it and how they respond to it.
So do you think over the last, 20, 30 plus years, there's been a shift as far as, what women have learned, to be more independent, more self-sufficient, and to reject acts of chivalry.
Absolutely. I think it has. I think that. I think that, and I know this will probably upset people, but I think that sometimes thoughts or statements are suggested by the media or through political figures, sports figures, different singers, that type of thing, that kind of catch on, and next thing you know, you have a lot of women that simply go along with it and go along with an idea, or go along, and it may not necessarily apply to them. It may not necessarily apply to their relationship, but simply because they heard it, they've questioned something, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna do that too. I mean, so, and I think that when it comes to chivalry, you hear people say, or women say, I can open my own damn door. It's like, well, it's not an offensive thing. We're not saying that you're incapable of opening the door.
Right.
Men are opening the door out of respect.
Right.
And because of that, you should let them.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but what I was about to say is, I think over the last several decades or whatever, there's been more of a push for women to be strong and independent, and I think probably so much so that they begin to frown on these acts of kindness or acts of chivalry or what have you.
And other women frown on other women that allow it to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, that's...
And so when a guy does something, the woman might, she won't say anything about it at all. She won't express gratitude for it. And, she sure as hell isn't going to tell her friends about that because she's, hey, I'm in charge.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I guess for me, it's kind of a BS argument, primarily because, or in my mind, it's a BS argument primarily because ladies, for everybody listening, all the three people out there listening, your value, who you are, is not derived from your ability to act or behave or do things like a man. Not in my opinion. The moment anybody brings that up, I'm going to call BS. It's just not. Okay, men and women are different. They bring different things to the table, and the strength of a woman is different than the strength of a man, and I think that's okay. I think that it's okay for women to act and behave and feel and operate like women. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's okay for men to act and feel and behave and operate like men, and I don't see anything wrong with that. That doesn't mean that a woman can't play football. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that women can't do other things that guys want to do. My point is this, though. I think it's wrong as a society to take women and tell them, no, you have to behave this way in order to have value. Mm-hmm. In order to be important, in order to, have that self-esteem. I think that's total BS, and I think it should never take place. I'm sure not going to tell my daughter that. It's like, what? I think it's wrong to force women or tell women, oh, you have to do this a certain way, and that's that. I think that's a joke. Especially when it comes to, no, I mean, there's a 150-pound box. You should be carrying it by yourself. Mm. And if a guy offers to carry it for you, tell him no, because you can do it yourself. I'm sorry. I think the strength in a woman is being able to people to lift that box with a word.
Right.
As a guy, I could never do that. Mm-hmm. I could ask a ton of my friends. They'd all say, "Go screw yourself. Do it yourself." So. I think that's a big difference. How are we doing on time? We gonna go to a break?
We should do a break.
All right, folks, we're going to go to break. We'll be right back. Once again, we're back. This is Jacob Larson. You're listening to the Common Sense Show. Just me and Theron here on the show, trying to wrap up the last couple shows that we did on men and women. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to give Theron and I, give us a call at 541-284-7953. Once again, that number is 541-284-7953. So, yeah, definitely a interesting show. What did you think about, on the men's show, I brought up the the guy that had written in, and he had mentioned about how, to make it easy, I mean, he mentioned about how morals played a big role in how relationships go. And the moment I said that, okay, the guys just exploded. I mean, they exploded in, oh my gosh, keep religion out of relationships.
Oh, because
don't
of the
bring
word
up
morals.
Don't bring up God. And I mean, they were just freaking out. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, for me, it's like, I care less if you're a believer or not believer. Okay, you can't sit there and deny the fact that when it comes to relationships, you got to be on the same moral playing field. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you've got one person that believes that lying, hey, that's okay or it's acceptable at times, and you got another person that's like, I'm totally against lying. I'm sorry, it's just not going to work.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have problems. Mm. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. It didn't have anything to do at all with religion, but I thought that was kind of interesting that, the way they reacted to it. It was like, morals equals religion.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden they just freaked out.
Yeah. Oh, we can't have that because we're going to be talking about sex, and that would just be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was stupid. But once again, I mean, I recognize that. I mean, obviously you're bringing up subjects that kind of hit home, and so for whatever reason, I mean, these guys have some sort of hang up when it comes to that. I mean, I like I said, hey, change the word, call it whatever you want, right. But I mean, you can't sit there and deny the fact that when it comes to a relationship, if a woman or a man brings deceitfulness, to the table, from the get-go, and of course, we had two guys going, "Oh, that's on you. That's on you." No, it's not. Okay, if you got somebody who's BSing you, and you're not, and they're new, and you don't know anything about them, and they're really good at lying, I mean, you may not pick up on it right away. So, if you have somebody that brings something like that to the table, I'm sorry. I mean, the relationship's doomed from the start, and that's what that guy was trying to say. He was like, you know what? If you are paying attention from the get-go, you can avoid a lot of that stuff just based on really being observant and watching not only what people say with their mouths, but how they act and behave, okay, when you're looking to date somebody or something along those lines. And I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble because they don't do enough research on a person prior.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not talking about a Google search here, but I mean some basic stuff. I mean, how a woman behaves in public.
Just kick back and observe.
Yeah.
Just keep your mouth shut for a little bit and just let her talk.
And for guys too. I mean, how a woman behaves in public, how a guy behaves in public around other men, other women. You can kind of get a good idea of what's going on and how you're going to be treated.
Yep.
I mean, I remember this lady that I had talked to years ago, and she was in the process of getting a divorce, and she's going on about this guy and all this other stuff, and I was like, okay, and she's telling me about how, first question to her was like, it's okay, was there any indicator at all that this guy was going to be this way prior to getting married? And she's like, no, prior to getting married, he was just such a great guy, and I was just totally duped. I mean, that's the response. It's like, no, I was duped. I'm like, okay, well, another question for you. Who bought the ring? And she's like, well, I did. I'm like, okay, that wasn't a red flag?
Yeah.
At all? That wasn't a red flag at all? I mean, I'm sorry.
Seriously? She bought her own?
She bought her own ring, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And
she wasn't duped. She was naive.
No, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's some really basic stuff that, I mean, you can sit there after a relationship and go, gee, I always find it fascinating when you're talking to somebody and they're like, well, what went down? And they're like, yeah, well, I had no idea he was going to be this way, or it was so different. It's like, no, you're not supposed to marry somebody after you've been with them a week or 2 weeks, a month. That's typically why people say, take some time to get to know somebody first before you marry them.
Right. Do you think it's, let's see. Do you think it's okay to look at somebody's past history? Okay, this person's been married, or this person's previous relationships, and apply that to the here and now as far as being in a relationship with that person? Should you spend much time on analyzing a person's previous relationships or previous actions?
Hey, I mean, it's really simple. I think that some of that goes into play, sure. I mean, it's definitely something you're going to want to look at. Do I think that people are stuck or bound to a type of circumstance, situation, or behavior, thought process that they were years ago? No, I don't. I do believe in change. I think people can
That's
change.
one area where I get really hung up because, you know, I come out of the gate with like, you know, I don't care about the past. I don't care about, you know, who you were married to, who you were involved with.
Well, you should.
And I'm like, well, all that matters is right here, right now, and from this day forward, right? And so that's usually the way I start off. But then, you know, when she's talking and she's throwing these things out there and she's saying this and she's saying that and, you know, some red flags are coming up,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like you can't help but put that into the equation.
You're going to, like I said, you're going to, even if only on a subconscious level, you are going to start making connections to things that have happened in the past and the things that are happening now, and you're going to draw different correlations between the two, or with the two. And I'm telling you, it's not a situation where you simply take somebody's past and you beat them over the head with it.
Right.
Okay. I'm not talking about doing that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, because that's not right either.
Exactly.
But you know, recognizing and understanding where somebody has come from, and looking at how it plays a role into the present circumstances that you're dealing with right now,
Right.
kind of a big deal. Got to know that stuff. So if you were with a woman who, yeah, in her younger days, well, she slept around quite a bit, okay? Or a guy that, you know, yeah, he slept around quite a bit.
And she probably still does.
Well, I'm not saying she still does. I mean, because obviously there are people that, you know, listen, they get to a point in their life where they're like, hey, that was
you're right.
stupid.
You're
and
right.
I've screwed
Yeah.
up, and I'm not going to do that anymore,
Exactly.
type of thing. I'm done with that. You know, I'm going to put that behind me. You can, but you got to have that. I mean, once you have that knowledge in the back of your head, you have to ask yourself, okay, because it's not. Listen, when people sleep around, or they have multiple partners, it's not the sex that's the issue. It's the thought process, the emotions that were going on in their head at the time that drove them to that point, that willingness to be able to do that.
Right.
And those are the things that you need to be aware of and look out for, because if you know, she hasn't done anything like that in years, or he hasn't done anything like that in years, and then you create kind of the same circumstance or situation in your relationship as they had back then, guess what you're in for? I mean, unless they've really gotten past something, you're gonna run into trouble. And it's not. I mean, obviously, it's not a science. You know, you can't sit there and say without a shadow of a doubt, well, this is going to happen. But
you start noticing patterns. Okay, she's done this.
Exactly.
She's done this. She's done that, and over and over again. Well, chances are
they should be things that you address. I
Yeah.
mean, you should absolutely, you know, if you see patterns. I mean, sometimes people will do things. The reason why they do things is for similar reasons. In other words, you know, that person may not go out and sleep with a bunch of people now, okay? But the reasons why they did that may come up or be reflected in other things that they do. And so when you see patterns, you know, of behavior traits or personality traits that somebody keeps continually doing over and over and over again, and the circumstances have changed, but the results end up being the same, then you have to, I mean, it's a red flag, and you got to go, hey, what's going on here? And it's something you need to address with them. If you can take somebody and you can actually point things out and go, hey, do you see what happened here? This is what you were doing back then, and this is the results. And now, 5 or 10 years later, okay, this is a different circumstance, different situation, but you're doing the same thing. If you can get them to recognize, sometimes, I'm not going to say all times, but sometimes it's kind of a light bulb that goes off in their head.
But you have to be pretty cautious in the way that you go about it, or else they're going to think you're being overly critical.
Sure, absolutely. But I mean, but like I said, I mean, it's one of those things where if you see something like that going on, and the only way you're going to do that is if you know somebody for any length of period of time. I mean, it's no different than the time that I've known you. Okay, I know that, you know, Theron says he's going to be here. Theron to be here. If Theron says that, you know, he's going to help, he's going to help. It would be uncharacteristic of you to simply not call me,
Right.
or not text me. So I would be, if that took place, you know, I'm going to look at it and go, gee, is this something that I deal with on a routine basis? If not, You know, something must have come up that's serious or something along those lines. But you have to have time for that, and you gotta know people a little bit better for that. So people that just meet and they hit it off, they're laughing, whatever, and then decide to move the relationship forward. I mean, that's when you really need to dig down and find out a little bit more about people. So let's see here. We have 10 minutes left of the show. I wanted to give a couple more things about that show that we were talking about. Let's see here. Oh, treat a girl like dirt and they'll stick to you like mud.
What?
Remember that? When I asked the girls this, I said, treat a girl like dirt and they stick to you like mud.
Oh.
And we were talking about treating bad.
Right.
Two of the girls disagreed and one agreed, and it got really confusing because she said, yeah, it's showing us that women need limitations. And then it got really confusing because they said, well, actually, there have been times where no means yes, and I've said no, but I didn't mean it. Remember hearing that?
Yeah.
And we're both sitting here, and we're scratching our head, and we're like, what the heck?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that was
Threw
confusing.
a monkey wrench into the whole logic thing.
Yeah. Totally confusing.
So, what do you think about that? That statement?
I think that in some ways it's true. It's something that guys have picked up on. Women obviously have picked up on it too. I don't like the term treated like dirt. I think that
there's a balance there.
I think
because
that
if you're
definitely
too nice, if you're cleaning her apartment, doing her laundry, she is going to crap all over you.
Yeah, I think that there's a level of expectation there, and I think for me, I define. I mean, me personally, it's like, you know what? I'm an incredibly nice guy, and most people know that. Okay, but they also know that I have an edge.
Yeah,
I have a bite.
But on the other hand, if you are treating somebody like dirt,
yeah, I don't.
A person's only going to take so much of that.
They're going to take so much of that, and they're going to kick you to the curb.
So I don't totally agree with that statement.
So I think that
there's a balance.
I think it's more along the lines of, you treat a woman with honesty and have that expectation of respect.
Yeah, you can't just be the nice guy. You can't be too because it will bite you.
It will bite you in the backside.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that the moment you do that, they don't respect you.
Exactly.
You do lose respect.
Exactly.
There. And I mean, just from a guy's standpoint, I'm just talking here based on what I've experienced. I think that, yeah, I mean, you try to, you like a girl, you think you're doing what you want, you write them poems, love letters, send them.
You're going out of your way.
They're going to ignore you,
Exactly.
man. They're not going to want anything to do with you. I mean, you kind of have to. I don't know. So okay.
I think for a lot of guys who are quote unquote nice guys, it's hard to find that balance. Because they just want to be giving. They want to be. They want to go above and beyond to impress and receive the love from this particular individual, and it ends up stabbing them in the back over and over.
Totally does.
Yeah,
totally does.
That's why I stand by my statement. Nice guys finish last. Always have. Okay. Always will.
Nice. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, we had talked about the cheating thing. I said women are more forgiving than men when it comes to that, and they disagreed, or they said basically, well, we just appear to be more forgiving. We'll make you pay the price later. We had talked about the double standard when it comes to sleeping around. Lady Blue was the only person on the show that actually hit it off. She said, listen, there's no distinction between the two. It's a piss poor thing for guys to do, and it's a piss poor thing for women to do. And frankly, I agree with her.
I do too.
I think all the way around, if you're doing that type of behavior, you're a dirtbag, period, end. So yeah,
you're also a dirtbag if you do it like immediately after breaking up with somebody too.
It's kind of a dirtbag.
Within a few days after you break up with somebody and you're taking somebody to bed.
Yeah,
that reflects poorly on you too.
And it's kind of gross. Okay, so I actually want to do the Tarbosh segment of the show. We haven't done it the last few shows, and this one I think is pretty good. So the Tarbosh segment of the show is change the way you think, to change the way you speak, to change your actions, to develop effort, to get results. Self-talk. It's a big deal.
It is.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
You can't think negative thoughts about yourself, okay, and then voice them and expect things to be good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know who made this saying, the change the way you think to change the way you speak saying, the one I just read. I really don't know who the author is. I mean, I looked, I can't find it. But, I mean, it's correct. Everything you do based on your thought process, how you perceive yourself.
And that programs your subconscious.
It does.
And after 21 days, it only takes 21 days to develop a habit.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're talking to yourself in this particular manner, positive or negative, within 21 days, that's going to be instinctual.
How you perceive yourself, how you operate. And the bad thing about it is people will voice, they'll voice those negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's a standard thing that you see. I mean, it's you know, everybody suffers with different negative thought process when it comes to their how they perceive themselves. And I had a guy tell me one time, you know, don't counsel with your own thoughts because you are your own worst enemy. You know, if you're going to push yourself down, if you're going to feel like you're down, it's typically going to come from you, that type of thing. But the key is you don't want to voice that stuff either. Number one, the moment you start thinking those negative thoughts, you got to recognize in and of yourself that it's wrong to think that way. And I don't care what it is. You're standing in front of the mirror and it's like, well, you know, this dress doesn't look good on me. Nah, you shouldn't be saying that. Or, gee, I'm overweight. Nah, you shouldn't be saying that. You got to switch that. But most importantly, you don't want to voice it. The moment you voice it, you're solidifying that thought in your brain. It's officially become real to you because you threw it out in the outside world. So you don't talk that way about yourself. It's a bad idea. I posted this as my status a couple, 3 days ago. Never put yourself down. There's plenty of people willing to do that for you. You don't need to be one of them. I mean, seriously, if you've got the entire world against you, the entire world that thinks you're evil, you should be the only one on the planet that agrees with them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you got to be on your own side, right?
Right.
But I think that said, I mean, it's kind of like, people on this that I've had come on the show. I've had people come on the show, and the first thing out of their mouth is, "Oh, I did terrible. I did wrong." You know, and I've done it to myself. I mean, the first show I listened to, I mean, I'm not immune to it either. The point,
you're your own worst critic, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to happen. So I'm not saying that you're a bad person for thinking that way or whatever. I'm just saying that it's not a good way to think. And because you know it's not a good way to think, you need to stop doing it. It's, in fact, it'll affect everything that you do. Right. I mean, it'll affect other people around you, and it'll change your outlook on life. I mean, it's not going to do anything to make you feel better or increase your situation for the good at all. It's simply going to do simply the opposite. So you need to change that. You know, change the way you think, change the way you speak to change your actions.
And I think a good way to start making that change is write down what you want to be thinking of yourself and saying about yourself, because you've developed habits in your own mind of the way that you perceive yourself and the way that you talk about yourself. So having a visual reminder, like an affirmation, as cliche as that might sound.
I know people don't like affirmations; they say it's bad. Frankly, I've got scriptures posted on mine, the Jabez prayer. I read those every single morning. It gives me a fresh thought.
I think the word affirmation in and of itself for a lot of people is negative.
Well, the Saturday Night Live skit. I mean, that kind of put it over the edge.
But really,
I'm a good person.
Really, athletes
which is
do
awesome.
it. Athletes do it. Professional people do the affirmations. It's not to make them say, I'm a good person and I'm great and I'm.
Yeah, you're not going to fill yourself full of BS.
But
I mean,
you are programming your subconscious mind. For example, if you are a track runner and you want to run a run in a particular amount of time, you're affirming that to yourself, that you have the strength.
I can do it. I can make it. I can push myself. I'm going to make it. I mean,
exactly.
You've got to be saying that.
And that's how you make that change.
You get somebody out there is like, well, I'm never going to win a race. It's not going to happen. I mean, chances are you're not going to make it. So, okay, so you'll create your own reality. Quick info: if you like what you've heard on today's show, please support the show. Go to www.buycommonsense.com. Click on supporting the show section of the site. If you'd like to be on the guest on the show, we'd love to have you. Pop me an email and I'll get you set up. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week, folks. We're going to have Rick Dancer on the show. Woo!
Woohoo! Woohoo!
Springfield Info Radio. News, information, and entertainment. 1320 Info Radio. A Cumulus station.